Many stories may seem harmless at first, but behind them lies a truth that's full of surprises. In a courtroom in the heart of New York City, a trial is taking place, where neon lights and digital technology paint a picture of the modern age. Daniel, a 19-year-old young man, stands as the defendant in a case of digital fraud and unauthorized access to a bank. He's about to face a daunting challenge. But what happens when he decides to defend himself against the prosecutor's accusations, becoming the only one brave enough to challenge the digital evidence system? Daniel's story isn't just surprising because of his bold decision, but also because of the journey to uncover the truth behind technological tricks. As a self-taught former hacker, Daniel not only excels in cybersecurity, but also knows the loopholes in the legal system. When the prosecutor presents irrefutable digital evidence, no one expects Daniel to find flaws within that very data. This is an adventure of intellect, courage, and pivotal moments in the quest to protect the truth. So, can Daniel prove his innocence? And will the legal system be able to keep up with the speed of digital technology? The answer might just shock you. Don't forget to hit subscribe and support the Golden Story channel to follow this thrilling journey. The bright neon lights outside blend seamlessly with the soft glow of LED screens in the heart of a New York City courtroom, creating a captivating contrast between modernity and solemnity. As you step into the courtroom, you can't help but feel the breath of digital technology creeping into every corner of the legal space, where every number, every line of data, carries the weight of a real-life story. In the first moments of the trial, the lights rise, illuminating the center stage of justice. Here, Daniel, a young man, barely 19, sits in the cold, contradictory scene of modernity. His eyes are a mix of anxiety and determination, as if every passing second affirms the struggle of a person fighting against fate. Daniel is not just the defendant in a digital fraud case and unauthorized access to a bank system, but also the embodiment of a young soul caught in the chaos of the digital age, where technology sometimes becomes both a tool of opportunity and injustice. In the quiet of the courtroom, Judge Thomas enters like a witness to strictness and curiosity. With sharp eyes and a commanding voice, he doesn't just display seriousness in his questions. He also hides a desire to understand the complex layers of the human being behind each accusation. He represents the legal system, one that doesn't just rely on digital evidence, but must also feel the pulse of human hearts. Alongside Judge Thomas stands a young, confident prosecutor who insists that Daniel's case is clear-cut and undeniable. With the heart of a modern-day warrior for justice, the prosecutor uses each word as a sharp arrow, attacking and cornering every dark corner of the truth, making the atmosphere in the courtroom tense and suffocating. The first moments of the trial open a door that leads the audience into a world where neon lights and digital technology aren't just symbols of the modern age, but witnesses to a tragic story. In this world, every person, no matter how small, carries a life story filled with pain, hope, and the yearning to be recognized. In that light, Daniel appears as a shadow, both seeking salvation and ready to face the consequences of actions he never intended, but that come with a relentless legal system. In the solemn space of the courtroom, where technology and law meet, the trial begins to unfold its story. The neon lights serve as a reminder that in the digital age, every action, every mistake, no matter how small, can become a fire that consumes a life. In that moment, the entire courtroom seems to fall into a reflective silence, waiting for the answer from the one person standing at the crossroads of fate and opportunity, of justice and bias. Thus, the cold, modern setting of the New York City courthouse lays the foundation for a tragic tale, where Daniel, accused of digital fraud, must face the light of truth under the sharp scrutiny of Judge Thomas and the undeniable confidence of the prosecutor. The first moments of the trial paint a vivid picture of a society where technology and humanity converse, challenge each other, and seek balance between justice and compassion. Daniel was no ordinary young man. Since childhood, Instead of indulging in harmless games, he had immersed himself in the vast world of technology. From the moment he crossed the threshold of adolescence, Daniel couldn't take his eyes off the computer screen, where lines of code and algorithms turned intangible ideas into reality, touching his grand dream of changing the world with the power of technology. But it wasn't video games that consumed his time during long nights. Daniel spent most of his time studying security, operating systems, and how software interacted with hardware. He taught himself through online courses, tech forums, and an insatiable curiosity about how everything in the digital world operated. Daniel didn't just program like others. He participated in cybersecurity competitions, where talents like him could showcase their skills in tackling real-world security issues. Daniel's life seemed like a never-ending series of challenges. Each time he delved deeper into security problems, he learned something new, fueling his passion even further. Through these competitions, he gained solid knowledge about vulnerabilities in computing and networking systems. Every victory and failure taught him not only how to sharpen his technological skills, but also the importance of understanding the laws surrounding technology. Daniel understood that, in a world where data, information, and even privacy could be threatened by people like him, knowledge of the law was just as crucial as understanding the circuits of a computer system. His self-education didn't stop at technical skills. He realized that using technology without considering legal boundaries could lead to serious mistakes. So, he began exploring the laws related to technology, reading documents on privacy, and understanding the legal implications of every online action. The question wasn't whether his actions could make him money, but whether he could change the system or the world fairly without breaking the law. In the process of reinforcing his knowledge, Daniel discovered answers to the vulnerabilities in security systems and saw opportunities to profit from exploiting those gaps. He believed that by conducting purposeful attacks on banking systems, he could not only highlight the mistakes in the tech industry and financial organizations, but also draw attention from the public and legal entities responsible for oversight. But once again, the learning and experimentation process couldn't remain just an ideal. The challenge came to Daniel when, after uncovering issues in the system, one wrong move led him to face the very legal process he had studied and understood well. Every step Daniel took marked a part of his dark, yet promising journey as a self-taught former hacker in a world constantly shaped by technology and law. He had navigated through textbooks, online courses, competitions, personal creativity, and the confrontation with the law, leading him to one inevitable place: the courtroom, where both technology and law would have to not only prove, but also judge the fate of a human being. The trial entered a tense moment as the prosecutor stood up, his confident figure illuminated by the neon lights from the surrounding screens. Every eye in the room settled on him, the one who would begin the process of presenting evidence to prove that Daniel was not just a dreamer, but part of the very real world of digital crime. The prosecutor, with a determined and persuasive voice, immediately started by presenting the digital evidence gathered by the investigators. Access data from a major bank servers, IP information, and system logs were met with a heavy silence in the courtroom. These numbers and codes carried the authenticity of the crime Daniel was accused of. The prosecutor didn't need to dwell on theories or search for vague explanations. For him, everything was on the screen, much like the clumsy justifications of the defendant. Data doesn't lie, and he was adamant that Daniel had illegally accessed the banking system. As the presentation went on, Judge Thomas remained still in his seat, his gaze unwavering. Yet his movements betrayed the growing doubt forming in his mind. Although famous for his strictness, the judge could not hide his displeasure as he watched the digital evidence being presented so coldly and simplistically. In a moment of disdain, he turned to the prosecutor and spoke in a stern voice. "These numbers, these data are just soulless fragments of an incomplete story. Daniel is merely a dreamer, a hacker who doesn't even know the price he'll pay. Are these proofs truly relevant to reality, or are they just the products of imagination?" Perhaps he felt that he hadn't yet stepped into the safe territory of legal compliance in this digital world. In his eyes, self-taught hackers like Daniel had no place in the authority that the law placed upon people. Judge Thomas wondered whether the walls built by the digital world could be easily broken down or were merely illusions after all. Were his doubts about the accuracy and legality of the digital evidence simply a sign of his stricter perspective, a signal of distrust in a world he hadn't fully embraced? At the same time, all eyes turned to Daniel. He sat there, his gaze drawn to the digital evidence, data that seemed irrefutable but was filled with ambiguity when viewed through the lens of the skills he had taught himself. The feeling that fate was cornering him grew stronger, a place where not only technology but reason and legality were challenging the relationship that these numbers represented. Everything around him seemed to freeze, as if time itself had paused. The next step in the trial was in the intersection between justice and the stories behind the screen, where neon lights weren't just symbols of modernity, but represented people struggling to find their place in the contemporary world, where a hacker could either be a criminal or a hero, entirely depending on how we choose to perceive it. An eerie silence descended upon the courtroom when Daniel suddenly stood up. His footsteps were soft, in rhythm with his business attire, until the complete stillness was shattered by his bold declaration. "Your Honor, I wish to represent myself." The courtroom seemed to awaken from a daze. Judge Thomas stared at Daniel, his eyes almost unable to believe what he had just heard. A 19-year-old defendant, with no legal experience, daring to declare that he would defend himself in such a complex case involving technology and data that even the experts had to bow down. The confirmations of digital evidence, the electronic traces the prosecutor had presented, seemed to have no effect on Daniel. A boy, in the eyes of most present, just beginning to encounter the turning point of his life, now boldly challenging the system itself. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow in skepticism, while the audience buzzed with confusion. They couldn't understand Daniel's motivation. Was it courage? Or simply naivete? Judge Thomas, still maintaining a stern face, but with a trace of curiosity in his eyes, was he wondering, could this be a clever strategy or just a suicidal move from this boy? Yet, despite the thousands of eyes upon him, Daniel stood firm. He was no longer just a defendant in a digital fraud case, accused of unauthorized access to a banking system. Now he had officially stepped into a new role, his own defender, daring to challenge the very foundation of the digital evidence presented by the prosecutor. In that moment, Daniel was no longer just facing lines of data, but was now confronting himself. He was no longer the passive recipient of a life filled with adversity. From this point, he was the one taking action, with a creative strategy aimed at dismantling the system of evidence the prosecutor had meticulously built. Each of Daniel's statements, each defense he made, was deeply personal, but also a reflection of the consequences of the world he had constructed for himself. He knew the system well, understood its weaknesses, and more importantly, he could clearly see whether the power of the law was strong enough to face those like him. Individuals who could wield technology as a weapon against the very system it was supposed to protect. The shift in the courtroom dynamic opened a new chapter, one where Daniel was no longer simply the accused. He became the active challenger, fighting against the power of numbers that had shaped his fate. But would this test push Daniel further away from the legal net, or was it simply a bold step that could never be recreated? When Daniel stood up, he not only continued in the role of the accused, but transformed himself into a defender of the truth in the world of digital data. He seized this opportunity to present a sharp rebuttal, aiming to highlight the inconsistencies in the evidence the prosecutor had presented. "You may not have noticed these details," Daniel began, his voice clear but filled with determination, "but I can see the errors in each part of the data that you consider irrefutable evidence." The courtroom fell silent, and all eyes, including Judge Thomas's, were fixed on Daniel. He meticulously pointed out that while the data routes presented were technologically accurate, the method of data collection was riddled with weaknesses. The timestamps and metadata, seemingly immutable traces, did not align with the actual events. How could anyone trust digital evidence when the timestamps themselves were out of sync? He emphasized that, in the world of hackers and cyber attacks, the accuracy of time and information is crucial. If all the evidence the prosecutor provided were truly accurate, these fragments of time and information would not exist. As Daniel continued, he compared the evidence used by the prosecutor to a flawed digital map. A map cannot miss key details without leaving a trace, he said. The words resonated in the courtroom like a bright light cutting through the darkness of the opposition. According to Daniel, a true hacker, if they had carried out the breach, would not have left such obvious gaps and errors. The holes in all the system logs were clear signs that this wasn't a sophisticated intrusion, but rather an incomplete action, lacking the necessary professionalism. In this way, Daniel made a powerful argument that data alone couldn't be the basis for a hasty and easy conclusion. His confidence and objectivity in every statement startled everyone in the room. The flaws in the data not only raised doubts about its authenticity, but also pushed the thought that this trial was full of ambiguity, where numbers alone couldn't answer the whole truth. Daniel's theory of a flawed digital map created a solid shield against the prosecutor's arguments, making everyone reconsider the flaws in the evidence they had relied on. This was a turning point, not just for Daniel, but for the entire trial. The digital evidence was no longer as solid as before, and with the powerful rise of logical reasoning, the light of justice now rested in the hands of a young person, someone who proved that sometimes, in the face-off between humans and the digital world, the clarity and sharp reasoning of a person can change the entire course of events. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew even more tense, as if every moment held a secret about to be revealed. After presenting sharp, logical arguments about the weaknesses in the initial digital evidence, Daniel now decided to introduce an irrefutable piece of additional evidence. With a calm demeanor but a determined glint in his eyes, he invited all gazes to focus on the large LED screen in front. On it appeared a detailed report from an independent cybersecurity expert, a document densely packed with data and technical analysis, showing that the bank's log system had been breached from an entirely different IP address, one that had no connection to him. "Your Honor," Daniel began, his voice echoing through the silent room. "This evidence proves that the digital trail presented by the prosecution is merely a part of a manipulated picture. The system logs have been tampered with, and the data has been altered to create the illusion of an act I did not commit." At the same time, Daniel presented additional data from the bank's digital surveillance system. Images, charts, and short video clips displayed a falsified transaction, a clear sign of prior infiltration, where the true attacker had left their marks. The numbers and timestamps shown on the screen highlighted unusual gaps, unexplainable contradictions in the data recording process. If this were the work of a professional hacker, the digital footprints would have been meticulously concealed down to the finest detail, he emphasized. But these gaps clearly show that an external force was manipulating the system's weak security. The courtroom fell into a suffocating silence. Judge Thomas's gaze froze, the light from the LED screen reflecting on his face, revealing a mixture of shock and curiosity. The prosecutor, once confident with his collection of digital evidence, now couldn't hide his unease as he realized this new evidence could completely overturn his original argument. Daniel continued, his voice growing stronger. "We are witnessing a game of technological manipulation, where the system of digital evidence, which is supposed to be objective, has been infiltrated and altered. The evidence you are looking at not only seeks to accuse an individual, but also exposes a serious flaw in the current security system." His words struck like a jolt of electricity, shaking the minds of everyone present, making them realize that this case might not just be the act of a hacker boy, but a sophisticated trick by the criminal to mislead justice. Under the eerie light of technology and the tension of the law, Daniel had opened a new door for the truth. He wasn't just defending himself. He was also revealing the mistakes, the vulnerabilities in the digital system, showing that technology, if not tightly controlled, could become a tool for manipulation. And in that moment, everyone in the courtroom, from the judge to the audience, had to stop and reflect, questioning the true nature of the digital evidence they had once trusted without doubt. As the lights in the courtroom began to dim after the tense moments, the atmosphere seemed to shift dramatically. After listening to Daniel's meticulous and weighty arguments, Judge Thomas, who had always been strict, was forced to face the truth. His gaze slowly softened, mixed with a sense of regret as he realized the serious flaws in the digital evidence that had been presented. He gently, yet decisively declared that, after carefully reviewing the evidence and Daniel's arguments, all the charges against him would be dismissed. In the final moment of the trial, Judge Thomas stood up, his voice resonating through the courtroom with gravity. In the digital age, the law must also evolve and be more creative, he shared, as a message not only to Daniel but to the entire justice system. His words, gentle yet full of meaning, opened a new ray of hope for those who believe that technology and the law can grow together, hand in hand, to create a more just society. As the trial concluded, Daniel slowly exited the courtroom with a determined gleam in his eyes. He didn't just feel relief at having his innocence proven, but also carried within him a deep desire to reform the legal and cybersecurity systems. The road ahead would still be full of challenges, but Daniel was ready to open a new chapter, one where old rules would be rewritten, where technology and humanity would join forces to build a brighter and fairer future.